So, I'm here to talk about change and writing, because whilst it's fantastic to be in a writing routine, and whilst it's always recommended to make a plan when it comes to any kind of writing, really, it's always a good idea to kind of know what you're doing before you start. The truth is, all writing is subject to change. Things can happen that you really didn't expect or plan for, and so you need to be flexible. And that goes for so many circumstances, really. It could be something in your life that happens, which means that you don't have the time to follow your plan or to follow your writing schedule. So you have to be flexible enough to change then and adapt and find different times to write. It could be that you get a piece of feedback from someone that you weren't expecting, or that sheds a whole new kind of perspective on your work, and you have to suddenly change direction, almost like a light bulb moment provided by someone else, giving your work to someone else. It could be that you're in a position where you thought that you got to the end of your novel, or you thought that you got to the end of your blog post, and when you've read it back to yourself, you've realised that you've got a whole load of editing work still to do, and it came from within you. You just knew that it wasn't quite finished yet. So there are lots of reasons why you might want to change. So it's about being flexible, and I think a lot of this comes down to always believing that something can be better. Of course, there comes a point where you have to let go, but generally speaking, it's always important not to find yourself kind of thinking that something is brilliant and perfect. I guess it's a little bit about humility, because the only way that you can change things, the only way that you can analyse your work and realise that something needs to be different, is if you're willing to change. You're willing to change things to the way that you work, or change things to your work itself. So it's really important to have that balance between good planning and good scheduling and sticking to it, but also being willing to admit and realise that at times that whole kind of plan might go completely out of the window, and instead you have to make some real changes to what you're doing. And that can be a revelation, and I guess this is kind of my point, really, is that if you are willing to adapt and be flexible and change your work or change your working pattern, then it can sometimes be a great revelation, and you can be liberated by it, because you can get yourself entrenched in a certain way of doing things, even a certain way of writing, and sometimes it takes a trigger of some sort to make a change that you perhaps didn't really see coming, but when it does, it transforms your work, and that's an amazing thing, and it's happened to me a number of times, both as I say, for working patterns, but also for my writing itself. A great example was plain English. So who'd have thought that when I worked on Sheffield Hallam University's prospectuses for 3 years, who'd have thought that learning plain English, how to cut writing down, and how to kind of write in a very kind of ordinary way, as in the language was ordinary, who'd have thought that that would have transformed my ability to write fiction? I never saw it coming, but it did. It was a real revelation, and thankfully I was willing to, and maybe not at first, because I was reluctant perhaps at first, but eventually I recognised that I needed to change the way that I wrote fiction, and the only reason I came to that conclusion was from this revelation about plain English, and that I had to edit better, and cutting things down was a really positive thing to do to your work. And that was change. It was a change in the way that I worked, and it ended up being a change in the way that I wrote too. So that's it, change. I've said the word change a lot in the last 4 or 5 minutes, but it is important, and that kind of is in the title of the blog post. That's it.